Sometimes a life changes not with thunder, but with the soft sound of paper moving through silence. On the 28th floor of a glass tower, that sound was almost nothing, a whisper of a drawer sliding open in the dark. Outside, the rain fell in patient threads, draping the city in silver haze. Inside, the only movement was a woman's breath, steady, tired, and unseen. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She worked nights when the world slept and ambition rested behind locked doors. Her hands carried the faint scent of bleach. Her heart carried the weight of hope that never quite fit into her paycheck. She didn't know it yet, but that single, forgotten envelope waiting beneath. A folder marked confidential would unfold the rest of her life. That night would draw her into a story of redemption and belonging, a story that would prove the quietest acts of honesty can echo longer than the loudest apologies. The city at night was a river of lights and loneliness. From the sidewalks, skyscrapers looked like galaxies that had decided to live too close together. Sarah moved among them, invisible as the wind between their glass bones. She lived in a second-floor apartment that smelled of soap, crayons, and warm toast. Her daughter, Emma, 7 years old, was asleep when she left each night, curled up with a stuffed bear that had lost an eye, but never its comfort. Before leaving, Sarah would tuck the blanket under Emma's chin, kiss her forehead, and whisper the same words she always did. "One day, sweetheart, things will get better." At the Harrison Tower, where Sarah cleaned, the night had its own personality. The air conditioning hummed like distant machinery. The floor lights cast long reflections across the glass walls, and the city outside blinked in a slow heartbeat of neon and fog. She pushed her cart down empty corridors that smelled of polish and power, wiping away fingerprints that didn't belong to people like her. The 28th floor was the quietest of all. It belonged to James Harrison, a man whose face lived on magazine covers and whose voice filled boardrooms. His office looked more like a museum than a workspace, walls lined with framed success, a desk carved from ambition, everything too perfect to touch. Sarah dusted each corner carefully, her reflection flickering on the polished surface like a ghost made of effort. Her back ached, her mind wandered, and for a brief second, she imagined what it might feel like to sit in that chair, not as a cleaner, but as someone who mattered. That's when she noticed it, a single envelope. Cream-colored, heavy, tucked halfway beneath a stack of documents. Its presence was unremarkable, and yet something about it felt out of place, like a whisper in a cathedral. Sarah hesitated. She was trained to ignore what wasn't hers, but curiosity, that small, dangerous companion of the overlooked, reached for her hand. She opened the drawer, and the envelope slipped free. Inside were stacks of crisp bills, $50,000 in neat bundles, and a folded letter. The ink was careful, controlled, the handwriting of someone used to being obeyed. The letter was addressed to Rebecca Cooper. The words were tender, trembling between regret and hope. A confession of mistakes, a plea for forgiveness, and one sentence that stopped Sarah cold. "I just found out about the boy, our son." The signature was clear, James Harrison. Sarah stared at the paper as if it were a mirror to a life she could never enter. Then she saw the note clipped to it, smaller, written by someone else. Rebecca Cooper, deceased 6 months ago. The rain outside grew heavier. The hum of the building deepened. In her hands, Sarah held a secret powerful enough to change several lives, and $50,000 that could change her own. Her chest tightened. Rent was overdue. Emma's school shoes were too small. The medicine her mother needed sat behind a counter she couldn't afford to approach, but so did her conscience. Sarah pressed her thumb against the envelope seal, then against her heart. "Do the right thing," she whispered to herself. "Even if no one sees you." When she left the building that night, the city air was sharp and cold. She carried the envelope inside her coat, not as a thief hides a prize, but as a messenger protects a fragile truth. Morning broke softly over a skyline made of ambition. Sarah stood outside Harrison Estates, where driveways curved like secrets and windows reflected a version of heaven reserved for the rich. When the door opened, James Harrison appeared, a man sculpted by order and control. The envelope left her hands and entered his. For a long moment, silence stood between them. Then his eyes darkened as he read shock, guilt, grief, 3 storms passing through one face. He thanked her, quietly, awkwardly, but the words felt small compared to what had just shifted inside him. That day was supposed to be just another cleaning shift for Sarah. Instead, it became the beginning of an invisible tether between 2 very different worlds. Over the next weeks, James searched for the boy he never knew he had. The process was not simple. It never is when truth arrives late. He hired people, made calls, followed leads that went nowhere. And somehow, through all of it, Sarah remained involved. Maybe because she was the only person who had been there from the beginning. Maybe because he needed someone who wasn't afraid to tell him what mattered. Together, they found Michael Cooper, 8 years old, living in a modest home with his uncle David and his grandmother. The house stood at the end of a gravel road, its porch sagging slightly under the weight of years. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old wood. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, Rebecca's smile frozen in time. David met James at the door with eyes that carried exhaustion and suspicion. He had raised Michael since the funeral, protecting him fiercely from a world that had already taken too much. The grandmother, small but steady, stood beside him like an anchor in aging skin. They didn't trust James, not his wealth, not his sudden concern, not his promises. To them, he was the man who hadn't been there when it mattered. Sarah watched the tension unfold from the edges of the room, silent but alert. She understood both sides, the guilt of the latecomer and the fear of the protector. She saw how grief can harden into anger and how anger can disguise itself as strength. She noticed Michael too, a quiet boy with large eyes and a sketchbook always nearby. He didn't speak much, but when he drew, the world softened. In one of his drawings, a tall figure stood beside a smaller one under a tree. The taller one had no face yet, just an outline. Sarah understood. The boy was drawing his father before he ever met him. Weeks turned into months. Conversations that began with tension started to find rhythm. James learned to wait, to listen, to show up without agenda. Sarah became the invisible glue, helping translate pain into patience, and yet not everything healed easily. David's distrust flared often. The grandmother wept quietly some nights, whispering Rebecca's name to the empty chair at the kitchen table. Through it all, Sarah kept cleaning offices by night and visiting the Coopers by day. The work was exhausting, but so was hope, and she carried both with the same endurance. Her daughter, Emma, became friends with Michael. They shared crayons, laughter, and the uncomplicated understanding that children often reach long before adults do. For James, each visit peeled away another layer of who he had been. He was learning that power cannot buy redemption, that it must be built from apology, time, and presence. For Sarah, the journey reminded her that goodness often costs something, but it was a price she was willing to pay. One evening, the sky split open with thunder. Rain hammered rooftops and bent trees sideways. Inside David's house, the tension finally broke. Old wounds surfaced, grief, anger, pride, all the ghosts they had managed to keep quiet until then. Accusations filled the air like lightning. The past refused to stay buried. James stood in the storm of words, stripped of defense. For once, his wealth offered no protection. He wanted to explain, to rewrite history, but every sentence felt like a stone thrown too late. Sarah stood apart, watching. The chaos felt familiar. She had lived enough storms to recognize when shouting only deepened silence, and then she saw it. In the corner of the room, Michael sat clutching his drawing book to his chest. Tears streaked his face, quiet and confused. The argument faltered. The adults turned, and for the first time they saw what their anger had done, not to each other, but to him. The room stilled. The rain softened. What followed wasn't forgiveness. It was surrender, the kind that comes when people finally understand they're on the same side. Pride lowered its voice. Grief loosened its grip. And love, fragile, unfamiliar, began to breathe again. That night, something shifted. James was no longer just a man chasing redemption. He was a father, learning to begin where endings once lived. And Sarah, standing by the window, watching rain slide down the glass, felt an old truth settle quietly inside her. Sometimes, the storms we fear are the ones that finally wash us clean. Morning arrived gently, as if afraid to disturb what the night had healed. The rain had rinsed the streets, and sunlight shimmered on the wet leaves outside. Inside the small house, silence felt different, no longer heavy, but expectant. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life began to change. James visited often, each time a little less like an outsider and a little more like a man discovering the language of ordinary love. He learned how to braid mornings from simple things. Burnt pancakes, unevenly poured orange juice, the small miracle of a child's laughter. He wasn't perfect. He missed cues, stumbled over feelings, learned that affection can't be scheduled into a calendar. But he stayed. And that, for once, was enough. David remained cautious at first, still holding the fortress of his fears. But he began to see something unexpected. He saw the billionaire kneel to tie a child's shoe, wipe rain from a sketchbook, and listen when Michael spoke of his dreams. He realized that grief had made him a guard, not a guide. And slowly he began to open the gates. The grandmother, once silent in her sorrow, started humming again while folding laundry. Sometimes she'd glance toward the doorway, half expecting her daughter's voice, and though tears still came, they no longer drowned her. They watered what was left of hope, and through it all, Sarah watched quietly, the way a gardener watches seedlings grow. She had delivered an envelope, but what she truly delivered was connection. Every gesture, every shared meal, every hesitant smile was proof that small kindness can ripple far beyond its origin. James didn't forget the money, the $50,000 that had started it all. He chose not to keep it, nor to return it to any vault. Instead, he used it as a beginning, a seed for something better. He created a trust in Rebecca's name, dedicated to helping single parents and children caught between worlds. It was not charity, it was redemption put into motion. Sarah helped organize the first outreach event. It was held in a community center where paint peeled from the walls and dreams waited patiently on plastic chairs. As she stood at the microphone, her voice trembling but sure, she didn't speak of the envelope or the secrets it carried. She spoke about honesty, about how every person, no matter how small their world seems, holds the power to change another's life simply by choosing decency over despair. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment, then came applause, not loud or frenzied, but steady, like rain returning to a roof it trusts. Over time, her role evolved. She no longer cleaned offices by night. She began working for the foundation, guiding families through systems that too often forgot their humanity. She became, without meaning to, the very thing she once believed was beyond her reach, a voice that mattered. Her daughter Emma thrived. She and Michael became inseparable, two children linked not by blood, but by the miracle of shared laughter. They drew together, dreamed together, and learned that family isn't always something you inherit. Sometimes it's something you build from broken pieces and brave hearts. James changed too. The man who once negotiated only with power began negotiating with patience. He still signed contracts, but he also signed permission slips. His mansion, once cold and echoing, now carried the hum of ordinary life, the clatter of dishes, the thump of small feet, the easy rhythm of belonging. One evening, months later, Sarah stood on his porch. The sky was painted with the deep blue of early night. Emma and Michael played in the yard, chasing fireflies that blinked like brief golden truths. Inside, David and the grandmother laughed softly over coffee. their voices warm and worn. James stepped beside Sarah, quiet for a while. No words were needed. They both knew what had been mended could never be exactly as before, but it could be whole in its own way. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant rain. Sarah looked out at the children and thought about the journey that had brought them all here, about how the smallest act of integrity can rewrite entire lives. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something rare, peace that didn't depend on circumstance. Not all miracles wear wings. Some come in plain envelopes, passed quietly from one pair of hands to another. Some arrive disguised as exhaustion, as a decision made after midnight by someone who still believes goodness matters. Sarah's life did not become perfect. There were still bills, still worries, still long days that tested her resolve. But now there was also meaning, stitched into each moment, a sense that she had become part of something larger than survival. The envelope that once tempted her to escape her problems became the thread that wove her into a community of healing. James found his son, Michael found his father, David found relief, and Sarah found herself years later. When Emma asked her what the biggest lesson of her life had been, she smiled and said that doing the right thing isn't about reward. It's about keeping the light inside you from going out, because that's the truth about kindness. It doesn't always change the world immediately, but it always changes something, a heart, a day, a direction. So, if you ever find yourself standing where Sarah once stood, alone, tired, facing a choice between what's easy and what's right, remember this: integrity is quiet, but its echoes last forever. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through ordinary people who do extraordinary things simply because they must. And maybe that's the greatest miracle of all, because sometimes the smallest choice made in the silence of a single night can change everything.